Springsteen effect. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rappin with the Rep. I'm really excited to present a really interesting show for you this time. We have Representative Mike Day from Stoneham. Mike is the House Chair of the Joint Committee on the Judiciary. Mike, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Ken. Love to be here.
And what we're going to talk about are two very timely topics here in Massachusetts going on right now. One is gun violence protection. There is a Supreme Court decision that we're going to talk about coming down dealing with concealed carry. And we've had this rash of mass shootings in the last, you could say in the last fill in the blank,
Sure.
days, weeks, months. It just keeps going.
Yeah.
And a lot of our residents are asking us, well, what more can we do? And so I want to talk about that. But first, let's start with what we've addressed most recently, which is Massachusetts' response to protecting the rights of women to choose what decisions are made about their body. And by that, I'm talking about the Roe versus Wade case, the Supreme Court case, which we've seen from a leaked opinion could be in serious jeopardy of being overturned, and we should know very shortly.
Sure.
So we've passed what we call the Roe Act earlier this session, which essentially codifies the protections of Roe versus Wade. Talk a little bit about you were vice chair when we did that.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Last term.
This was the last term. Talk about where we sit here, where women sit here in Massachusetts. Should Roe versus Wade be overturned or severely restricted?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were all a little bit shocked and chagrined, I guess, is how you'd say it, with that leaked decision, rolling back decades of precedent, setting back, I think, women's rights decades if this comes out in any form that we've seen in the leaked opinion. We in Massachusetts are in a much, much better place as far as women's reproductive freedom here. There's a state SJC, Supreme Judicial Court decision that came out in the 80s, early 80s, I believe, called Moe, ironically enough. There was Roe in the federal side, Moe in the state side. And the state decision said, your right to privacy in your body, your bodily control, is constitutional explicitly constitutional in the Massachusetts state constitution. And so if the Supreme Court rolls back the federal protections that were enunciated in the Roe decision, we still have the state piece to rely upon. And what we did in the legislature was as you said, codify what the SJC ruled in our state constitution. And so in the wake of Roe, a large number of pro-life at the time legislators passed highly restrictive laws outlawing abortion. That was flipped by the SJC in that Moe decision, and those laws still remained on the books, nominally. They could never be enforced because they're unconstitutional. What we did in Roe was clean a lot of that up. The Roe Act is clean a lot of those up, took those off the books, made sure that we were codifying what the Constitution says, which is a woman has a right to her body and a right to make her own reproductive decisions. And so we are in a much different position, I think, than other states in that we've got our own constitutional protections and our now statutory protections as well here in Massachusetts. We are, a beacon, I think, and going to continue to be a beacon for women who want to make sure that they can control their own body and their own choices.
And let's just talk about the perceptions and misperceptions of our Roe legislation, as well as the rights of women to control their own body here in Massachusetts. And we follow the Roe versus we follow the principles in Roe versus Wade, which is the trimester type of a principle.
Right.
When there becomes a life in being, a woman has a right, a constitutional right to privacy to make decisions. We realize that after a birth there is a child who has rights too. The question is, in Roe versus Wade and in our acts, is the balance.
Sure.
And we recognize an unrestricted a right at a certain point, and then we recognize when there's a discussion. And I think that's important for people to realize that we tackle this in a meaningful way in these discussions. And so I think, continue what has been precedent in the United States for 40 years, right?
Right.
In fact, I think when you look at it, is women of childbearing age now have never lived in a country where they have had their rights to abortion care restricted. And in other states, they're going to be in a world that they've never seen politically before. But in our state, it's different. Now, there's discussion here about how can we protect women coming to Massachusetts to exercise rights that we protect we provide for people
Right.
here. And in fact, anybody that comes to this state still has the same rights as to health care as people from other states. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, so there's we've seen the leak decision. That's one of the pieces, and we're concerned with it, that it's going to roll back decades of precedent with a rogue court, right? We've got 5 members, at least 3 of whom apparently misrepresented their positions to the United States Senate when they were recently confirmed about their value of precedent. That seems to be out the window if that leaked opinion is to be believed. Troubling in its own right. Take away the discussion about reproductive freedom and bodily integrity. There's a secondary case dealing with the Texas law, and a Texas law that says you're not allowed to have an abortion, you're not allowed to exercise your reproductive freedoms, and if you go to another state to do so, we'll still follow you there, and we're going to sue the practitioners, the healthcare providers, and we're going to sue you. And by we, I mean a citizen, right? You're going to have a vigilante type of setup there. So the court took that case as well. If they continue down this road of overturning precedent, overturning what we believe we are as Americans, we've got a real crisis on our hands, constitutional crisis, in that a state under the Constitution has got to give full faith and credit to the laws of another state. This would turn that on its head.
Right.
And so it's tough to be optimistic with these 5 justices, and these 3 in particular, who have not been truthful in their positions. But I am cautiously optimistic that they will recognize that fundamental concept of full faith and credit. And by that I mean a Texas law that's in violation of a Massachusetts state law won't interfere, won't cross the border to Massachusetts. So if a woman travels to Massachusetts for her reproductive freedoms, our laws govern when she's in Massachusetts. Texas laws stop at the border.
Right.
That's the concern that we have, is that this court may go beyond that. And so there's a movement and there's a discussion that we're having now about making sure that that doesn't happen. And you can do that in a number of ways. One would be we're not going to extradite our practitioners. We're not going to allow them to be taken to Texas to deal with this. We're not going to allow any civil judgments against a practitioner in Massachusetts to be given effect here, or if we do, we'll allow them to recover their damages here in Massachusetts and exercise that in Texas. Kind of a tit-for-tat almost approach, which I think is terrible, but it'd be a position that the court may very well put the states in if it decides to move in a different direction on the Texas law.
Yeah, I mean, it really would be mind-boggling when you think about any other area of law. For example, if somebody, take a simple case, if somebody's driving in Massachusetts and they may be a resident of somewhere else and there's an auto accident, well, the laws of Massachusetts apply.
Right.
If there's a lawsuit, the victim is here in Massachusetts, the other driver, they'd go to Massachusetts, have a trial in Massachusetts using Massachusetts law, because that's where, what we say, the tort occurred.
That's right.
That's where it happened. There's no connection between that doctor and Texas in your example at all. In any other way. And so the Supreme Court would be carving out an exception to what you said, full faith and credit, to this whole concept that we as states are in fact entitled to that respect of setting our laws and organizing our laws in that way. And to veer from that, it has so many constitutional ramifications.
It is as you said, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The ripple effect of what that precedent would set going there. And again, precedent may not be of value right now, unfortunately, with this court. So we in Massachusetts will be ready to deal with it, and we'll move quickly to shore up anything they try to erode on our end.
I was proud of the way when we passed that legislation, and you were just a seminal part of that, is we brought in opinions from from members of the House of Representatives representing different areas of the state with different views and representatives with different views, but everybody got together in a discussion with the Judiciary Committee about what their needs are, what their values and their views are, to come up with a piece of legislation that was a compromise but enough to satisfy the membership that we got the votes that we needed to protect women's rights here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give full credit to former Representative Chair and now Ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, who was my predecessor as the chair. She invited every single member to come in to talk about the act, the proposal, and share their views and their concerns and their wishes on that act. And at the end, as you said, it was a compromise piece of legislation where every voice was heard. And that bill was truly shaped by the membership, which is obviously shaped by the people of the Commonwealth. So the bill itself, I think, was a quintessential example of how we in Massachusetts, in the legislature, handle things differently, I think, than certainly the federal side, but other states as well.
Yeah, and that, again, to Chair Cronin, now Ambassador Cronin, and bringing everyone in, listen to views, some of which she personally agreed with and some that she didn't, but understood that
Right.
these are views that are valid in particular districts or Commonwealth-wide,
Yeah.
and need to be respected.
And I think that's what you see. I mean, you always hear about this dysfunction in Washington, and people are always saying, "Well, I don't see that in Mass." You don't see that in Mass
You don't.
because it's a inclusive debate that we have. We may disagree, we may vote off at the end of the day, and I may vote against the proposal, but at least my voice is heard, it's respected, it's input that is valued into the ultimate package of what we end up passing, whether it's Roe or any other proposal as well.
What we also did, and when I was new to the legislature, it surprised me because my view of legislatures was sort of shaped by what I read in the media about Washington, right? And you're smiling because you probably had the same experience. We also consider the views of our Republican colleagues,
Absolutely.
if they're good ideas. We don't look to see if there's an R or a D before an idea.
Yeah.
We bring it in. And go ahead.
You see that in our votes, right? People always say it's 160 to nothing. That's you steamrolled that through. No, we've got a very diverse array of opinions in Massachusetts and in the legislature. Ultra liberal, ultra conservative, and then everyone else. And when you get 160 to nothing vote, that tells you that people are on board. People have worked this thing through. They've come to a realization that it's a good package, whatever it ends up being at the end of the day. Our budget, which I always look at as a value statement in Massachusetts, passed, I believe, unanimously this cycle. That's
Right.
everyone's input being baked into this final product.
Right, and in addition to that, when we have local issues and we have colleagues that are from the other side of the aisle, call it, in
Yeah.
my case, Representative Lombardo in Billerica is
Sure.
right over the border from Bedford and from Burlington. We couldn't work closer. He was a guest here on Rappin with the Rep maybe a few years ago, and he
Yeah.
talked about that. We don't agree. He certainly did not vote for the
Sure.
Roe Act,
Sure.
of course. But we work very closely when it comes to the needs of Middlesex Turnpike going through the borders of our towns, or the economic development for life sciences from our area. Those issues, and so if we cut each other down at the knees on one area, how can we expect to work together like that economically on another?
That's right.
And we don't do it.
No, you don't, and it's not going to work in Massachusetts, right? I think at the end of the day, we've got a Republican governor, we've got a Democratic legislature. We're all pulling in the same direction at the end of the day. We're all trying to make Massachusetts better. We may disagree on, intricacies of what is going to make it better, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same space. And you see that in Massachusetts being number one in education, healthcare, quality of life. We can always do better. We're always working to do better and make sure we're addressing the particular concerns of what's going on in our districts and across Massachusetts. But I think that the proof is in the pudding, as you'd say, right? That we are the safest and the healthiest and most successful state in the union.
And so I appreciate that, and that's a good segue into our conversation about gun violence protection here in Massachusetts. In the wake of the Sandy Hook shootings, we passed a package now going on 10 years, but it made Massachusetts one of the safest states in the nation. And now, as chair of Judiciary, comment a little bit about where we are with respect to our own laws and compared with other states, and then where we can go from here.
Yeah, so we are Hawaii recently, I guess, overtook us in a good way in becoming the lowest incidence of gun violence in the country. I will say that we are in a different spot than Hawaii, right?
Right.
We're not an island. You can't control what's coming over our borders as much as you can in Hawaii. That said, we are the safest state in the mainland, and Hawaii's got us by a little bit because of our proven gun safety laws. right? We've passed reasonable measures that are related directly to gun safety, background checks, limitations on what type of weapon, and these are weapons. These aren't. I don't call them guns. You're talking about assault weapons. Limitations on that. Strict adherence to our local authorities who know us the best, right? So our police are the licensing authorities, which is unique. We give them a lot of discretion because they know us. I talked to my chief yesterday about the gun laws, and he said, "Yeah, no, look, I've turned down five folks who've applied because I know who they are, and they shouldn't have guns. And I've gone to the mat for another 5 who are responsible people, and given them permits. So our scheme works. It's based on rational and safety-related measures, and again, you're seeing the results in that in Massachusetts itself. We can't stop guns coming in from across the borders, right? From New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, wherever they're coming from, where they're coming in. But what we have been able to do is regulate who can own them legally, what capacity and what actual weapon is allowed, and you're seeing that directly reflected in our gun violence totals, which are minuscule compared to the rest of the country. Sadly, you had referenced earlier the number of mass shootings. I think there have been 3 days in this year where we haven't logged a mass shooting, and that's 3 or more people injured by guns.
And the year's
3
half
days,
over.
and we're in June.
Yeah.
It's just stunning that you've got this. I was talking with a minister in Winchester yesterday who moved in from Colorado about 1.5 years ago in the midst of COVID to take over his parish there. And he said, "Look, Mike, I can't tell you the number of suicides by gun, the number of just violence from guns that we had out in Colorado." He said he could kind of breathe when he got to Massachusetts because he could, concern himself with other aspects of what his flock needed, as opposed to healing people from gun violence.
Yeah, you hear from our residents that they're right. They feel their sort of natural right to feel safe.
Yeah.
Just feel safe in a school, in a mall, in a movie theater, and that's important to us too. While at the same time protecting the rights of people who are going to use their guns for legal purposes.
Sure.
But you have that right too, and people, I'm proud to say, do feel, like you just said in your example, safer here. Unfortunately, as you said, I think the majority of guns that are used to commit crimes in Massachusetts are taken in from other states.
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah, and we don't stop cars to inspect at the state border.
Yeah.
So there's really not much we can do, but make sure that when guns are recovered here, they're treated under our laws, right?
And what we have done works, right? I mean, I hear some folks saying, you have to bulletproof the school. You have to do X, Y, Z on safety measures.
Yep.
That's all well and good. We're always going to want to make our schools safer. We're going to make our public spaces safer. But the gun measures we've put in place, the safety measures, work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our numbers prove it out.
Yeah, and when you're adding more and more infrastructure to schools, people talk about arming teachers. People talk about, more guards or more this or more that. I think the students looking around don't feel so safe.
No, of course.
When you see, you've traveled as many of us have. When you see guards with guns around you, that doesn't make you feel safe.
Right.
Because there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
One bill that we have, I think it's your committee, deals with ghost guns. Or actually, I think you may have, am I right, you've referred it out?
It's in public safety now. It'll probably come back to us. It started in public safety. It'll probably come to judiciary.
So this is an issue that interests me, and this is where people can buy parts to guns, or they can create and manufacture parts to guns on a 3D printer if they don't have serial numbers. And we've been taking a look, I think, at including that in the list of things that you've got to properly register, record, or not use. Can you talk a little bit about ghost guns?
Pardon me. Yeah, so as you know, in the legislature, we're constantly re-examining our laws. We're constantly reevaluating, are there loopholes that are now developed because of societal gains, right? Technology advances, our laws need to advance with them. Ghost guns are a perfect example of that. Who would have thought 10 years ago that you could piece together a gun from a printer, a plastic gun from a printer, and have it be a weapon? These are, as you said, they're unlicensed, they're untraceable, they're meant to evade laws. They're meant to evade gun safety measures. And so we're looking at that very hard. I'd be surprised if we don't do something on ghost guns to regulate those, because it's a measure of just trying to get around sensible safety measures again.
Right. Thank you for looking into that, because I think that is important.
Yep.
Are there any other issues that you're looking into that we can talk about to, like you say, making these adjustments to the laws we already have?
So we're watching the case in New York,
Yes.
the New York case, I should say, the Bruin case, that's in the Supreme Court now. We're anticipating a decision. We're in mid-June now. We'd anticipate a decision within the next week or two coming out. That may very well say that our law that requires a reason for a concealed carry, right, to be able to walk around with a weapon on your side but conceal it. We've got a law basically that says a licensing authority can require a reason to have that. Why do you need to have a concealed carry in Massachusetts? That may very well get flipped by the Bruin case in the Supreme Court right now. If it does, we'll be moving expeditiously, very quickly in the legislature to tie up any of the loose ends that this court may fray from our safety net of regulations, our safety laws in there. So full credit to the Speaker of the House who grabbed me earlier in the year, and we talked about this case on the Supreme Court docket and what the ramifications would be if they decided to flip our regulatory scheme. Our laws are based on rational safety measures, right? We've all got our First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment rights all the way through. But as you'd referenced a little earlier, those have a limit, right? My right to do whatever I want to do can't impinge your right. And so the same with the Second Amendment. We've got a right. The Supreme Court has recently ruled in the last decade or so that you've got a right to carry a firearm. That runs into my right to be safe at some level. And so we in Massachusetts have drawn that line fairly squarely. And I think that, again, it's proved out to be accurate that these safety measures are working. They're drawing the proper boundary between my right under the Second Amendment and your right to be safe. And so if that gets frayed in any way, I think that we in the legislature will be moving, as I said, pretty quickly to make sure that that gets shored back up so we can continue to live without fear.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and it kind of goes into something I hear all the time is people talking about the concept of freedom, as if and freedom is great until the concept is I'm free to interfere with someone else's rights.
Right.
Because oftentimes in our society, there are conflicting rights, and the legislature, we have to look at that and make sure we're protecting everybody's rights, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at what is government? What are we doing in America? We live in freedom. It's not unfettered. We agree to live together in a society by rules, by laws, so that I can enjoy my safety and freedom, you can enjoy yours, and they don't conflict. And there are boundaries. There are boundaries. I don't have unfettered freedom. I can't drive my car through red lights. I can't speed around and because I need to get somewhere faster than you, knock you off the road. There are boundaries to what we do in a civilized society, and this is one of the areas we're talking about.
Yeah, and here in Massachusetts, to use your example, you need insurance when you drive you need a license when you drive your car, and you need insurance to protect yourself, but also to protect the other drivers on the road. And we accept that, and we live that way because we really understand fundamentally that that's the logical reason why we organize ourselves with these laws, so that everyone is protected.
Yeah, we all do
so
better,
stay
right?
safe.
It's a commonwealth.
Right. So and so I appreciate what you're saying. So this going back to this Supreme Court case, which is really important, because what it's looking at is a New York law that I think is 100 years old or more than 100 years old, where New York, through its legislature, speaking from its residents, has said that there's a limit to the questions on concealed carry. And the Supreme Court is saying, well, we want to second guess your state legislature. And now your state legislature, and not even the state legislature, because it's a 100-year-old law, your law is now unenforceable, even though you've had it there for 100 years. And rather than turn to your legislature to consider amending it, we're going to do that for you.
Very dangerous precedent. The Harlow case, which was decided years ago, which it seems, if you follow the oral arguments and some of the papers submitted, some of the questioning from the justices, they're at least paying lip service to it. And that said, states have a right to set reasonable, rational safety regulations on this right to a firearm. we'll see what they end up doing in this case. But as I said, we'll be ready in Massachusetts to shore up anything they do to erode our safety rights.
Yeah, and it's still, I go back to thinking again about this some of the political conversations that go on in this country. People talk about activist judges, but I think it bothers some people only when it's activist in the way that they don't want to see, because this activism is going on right now with, as an example, this New York case, looking into New York and interfering with what New York believes to be its best ability to protect. It may not be the same thing that Colorado believes, for example, or Texas, or Oklahoma, but this has worked for New York.
Yeah, that's right.
And in Massachusetts, coming back to the topic of our conversation, we believe that what we've framed has worked in Massachusetts because, as you said, looking to the example of people who want to carry, have a permit to carry, they go to their local chief. Now, if they don't like the decision of their local chief, we still put into our legislation that they have a right to appeal.
Sure.
And interesting, what we did was we just looked at what we call the burden of proof. In other words, if tie goes to the runner, who's the runner?
Right.
Right? And in some cases it would be the chief, and in some cases it would be the applicant for the license, because we think that's fair.
Yeah.
In looking at that. So anything else you're looking at on that area of gun violence protection? We talked about whether we're going to have to address protections of of people in here. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, again, you look at the ghost gun issue as a good example of us constantly reevaluating our laws, making sure that there's nothing that we've overlooked or that something's developed that we now need to address. Bump stocks are a great example of that. We had that horrific mass murder out in Las Vegas with an individual who was able to use a device to turn his semi-automatic into an automatic and just slaughter dozens of people out there. We looked at our laws at the time, realized that we didn't have a prohibition specifically on bump stocks, and made sure that we did that. We're looking now at whether or not our laws cover Glock switches, which again are another way around our prohibition against assault weapons and automatic weapons. Turns a semi-automatic, which you shoot one at a time, into an automatic where you just pull the trigger once and your ammunition flies out without having to pull the trigger again. That's the difference between semi and automatic. This device would allow you to convert a semi-automatic into an automatic. So we're looking at whether or not our laws, we believe they do, but we're going to make sure they prohibit that new device as well. So technology is constantly evolving, which generally is a good thing. In this situation, we're seeing with ghost guns and with this Glock switch that the evolution of technology is meant to evade reasonable safety regs.
Right.
So we're looking at that issue as well.
Right. I mean, certainly, as you said in the beginning of our conversation, there are weapons of war that are appropriate for war.
Yeah.
There are other weapons that are appropriate for public safety officials to have while they're at the job. I get that. I think most people get
Sure.
that. But to have these weapons used by private people outside of any employment capacity is something that I don't know I've ever heard anyone explain properly in all the time we've been working on this.
Yeah, it defies logic. I was talking to John Rosenthal yesterday, who's the group is behind that billboard behind Fenway that you'd see talking about how many gun deaths have been occurring over a certain period of time. And he said, look, we don't allow people to drive a tank down the road, right? You don't need a tank in your house. You don't need to be going down Main Street in a tank. Same thing with assault weapons. These aren't weapons. These aren't devices that are meant for everyday living. There's a specific purpose to an assault weapon, and it's to kill. And it's designed for war. When you're involved in a war, you're looking at what's going on in Ukraine now, horrific. Those are weapons. Those shouldn't be in our main streets. Those shouldn't be, in an 18-year-old's hand who can walk into a school and slaughter kids. That's a weapon that's no place in our society. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It can only be used for trouble. And when you hear, there was a recent senator who talked about, well, they hunt groundhogs or something with that, and I thought, okay, first of all, I'm not sure how the purpose of that sport, but okay. What sport is it to hunt a groundhog with a weapon that fires that rapidly?
Yeah.
What challenge is that?
It's
What
not a
purpose
hunting
is that?
tool.
Yeah.
It's not a hunting device. It's a weapon of war.
Yeah, it is. So thank you very much for your work in protecting our residents here in Massachusetts from these weapons of war in the wrong hands, in hands here in the private sector in our state.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to join you here today. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for the work that you do. You're one of the folks that we rely upon in that house. Highly intelligent, thoughtful, thinks through the issues, and then when you speak, we all listen because it's a valued opinion, and you're one of the leaders in there. So appreciate your work very much.
Well, Chairman, Representative Mike Day, thank you very much for coming here on Rappin with the Rep. Look forward to seeing you again, and folks out there, tune in again next time. This is Rappin with the Rep.